Hello everyone, my name is Selena, and today I will be discussing Oscar Wilde. I chose Oscar Wilde because I believe his work is insightful and critical, and because he had a lasting impact on society and popular culture. He continues to be referenced today, not only in movies, but in the literary world as well, through stories like The Picture of Dorian Gray and his real life. He has become a symbol for the LGBTQ community. Oscar Wilde was born on October 16, 1854, in Dublin, Ireland. He died 46 years later in a hotel in Paris, France. Wilde was a poet and dramatist. He was famous for his novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, which was published sometime in 1890 and again in 1891. He was also known for comic pieces like Lady Windermere's Fan, which was in 1892, and The Importance of Being Earnest, which was in 1895. Wilde was one of three children born to literary parents Jane Francesca and William Wilde. He had a brother and a sister named Isola, who died at the age of 10 from meningitis. His long poem Ravenna won him the Newdigate Prize in 1878. The Newdigate Prize is a poetry award that was founded in 1805 by Sir Roger Newdigate. It is awarded at the University of Oxford, where he attended school. In 1878, Wilde graduated from the University of Oxford. Wilde was known to be witty and well-spoken. William Butler Yeats once said, quote, "I never before heard a man talking with perfect sentences, as if he had written them all overnight with labor and yet all spontaneous." Wilde enjoyed living a lavish lifestyle and turning heads. He often wore colorful attire, which was significantly different to the black attire at the time. He was known for wearing velvet knee breeches and dressing in a youthful manner. He made comments about age and aging, not only through his work, but verbally as well. He once said, quote, "The opinions of the old on matters of art are of course of no value whatever." End quote. Wilde was part of the aestheticism and decadent literary movements. Aestheticism was popular in London during the early 1800s. Its main belief is that art exists for the sake of its beauty alone, and that it need serve no political, didactic, or other purpose. In other words, art for art's sake, as they often said. The decadent movement, on the other hand, aspired to challenge cultural norms and artistic conventions. It originated in the 19th century France and England. Aside from being a part of both movements, Wilde was a critic of literature and society as a whole. One of Wilde's most famous writings, The Picture of Dorian Gray, centers around a handsome man named Dorian and his portrait. In a Faustian manner, Dorian wishes to stay young forever and for the portrait to age instead. Much to his surprise, his dream comes true. Instead of aging, Dorian remains young. However, as Dorian makes questionable decisions throughout the story, his painting begins to reflect these acts. It becomes more and more recognizable. The novel is a cautionary tale about vanity, and despite the preface stating that art and morality are separate, it comments on the latter too. In many ways, it criticizes hedonism and the beliefs that surround it. Hedonism is a philosophical belief that focuses on pleasure and pain. The theory states that pleasure and pain are the only thing that matters. This can be summed up into one phrase: the good life. The theory argues that, quote, "all and only pleasure is intrinsically valuable, and all and only pain is intrinsically not valuable. To break it down even further, this theory suggests one should maximize pleasure and minimize pain. There are several types of hedonism, but this explanation sums up the main concept of the theory. Aside from its philosophical aspect, the picture of Dorian Gray resembles Christopher Marlowe's play Dr. Faustus. During Marlowe's play, the titular character makes a pact with the devil, also known as Lucifer, through his minion named Mephistopheles. While rummaging through books, Faustus realizes he craves more knowledge and power than the world has to offer. Rather than settling for the books that exist, he decides to sell his soul for Mephistopheles' service. The demon offers Faustus magic and power, two things he so dearly craves. As you may have assumed by the words cautionary tale, this story serves as a warning. Rather than repent and go back on his promise, Faustus doubles down on his pact. He misuses magic and has several opportunities to break his agreement or repent. Despite the many chances, he refuses until it is too late. Once his time is up, a group of demons drags him to hell as he begs for mercy. The picture of Dorian Gray reminded me a lot of Dr. Faustus. Both characters are unsatisfied with their current life and seek questionable resolutions. In doing so, they make one unethical decision after another, and mostly fail to recognize their error. Although Dorian tries to change his way towards the end of the story, this effort proves to be pointless. He has already dug his grave, so to speak. Now he must lay in it. Wilde sometimes made fun of Victorian society. Over the course of 11 months, Wilde gave 141 lectures in the United States during 1882. Most of these lectures were on the topic of the English Renaissance and the decorative arts. According to the Poetry Foundation website, the English Renaissance can be difficult to date. However, it begins with the start of the Tudor dynasty, which lasted from 1485 to 1603, and reaches its peak during the 45-year reign of the final Tudor monarch, Elizabeth I, from 1625 to 1649. The era was full of political tensions and religious hostility between Catholics and Protestants. The Renaissance ends once those tensions reached a boiling point, which resulted in a series of civil wars between parliamentarians and royalists, the execution of Charles I, the pause of republican-led governments, and the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. This movement shaped English identity domestically and abroad. The decorative arts deals with art that is functional and beautiful. Some objects in this category include ceramics, glassware, and furniture. Wilde stopped at Yale College while lecturing in the United States. During his lecture, Wilde spoke about aestheticism and how students there could apply this movement to their own region. Wilde also brought up an anecdote about his mentor John Ruskin. While on a stroll together, Ruskin questioned Wilde's beliefs in aestheticism. He asked if beauty was really all that mattered, or if there was more to life than that. Isn't giving back to the community equally as important? At one point, during his lectures, Wilde said, quote, "To disagree with three-fourths of all of England on all points of view is one of the first elements of sanity." End quote. Although he was married to Constance Lloyd at the time, Wilde began an affair with Lord Alfred Douglas, a young poet, whom he met in 1891. After being accused of homosexuality by Douglas's father in 1895, Wilde sued for libel. Unfortunately for him, Wilde lost the case. Since homosexuality was illegal at the time in England, Wilde was arrested and convicted. He was forced to serve 2 years of hard labor for what was known at the time as, quote, gross indecency. He eventually ended up getting a divorce from his wife at the time. While in jail, Wilde wrote "The Ballad of Reading Gaol" in 1898 and "De Profundis" in 1905. Penniless and now divorced, Wilde moved to France, where he spent the remainder of his life. Wilde was buried in France at the time of his death. One of Oscar Wilde's famous quotes is, quote, "To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist, that is all," end quote. To put this quote into perspective, let us think back on Wilde's life. Although he was penniless, towards the end, at one point, he lived a lavish life, especially during his marriage to Lloyd, whose father was wealthy. He also lived in the sense of the many places he traveled and all the people he met and had relationships with. Wilde was known for putting himself out there and thinking highly of himself. Another quote I would like to mention is, quote, "The books that the world calls immoral are books that show the world its own shame," end quote. This quote is from The Picture of Dorian Gray, and likely a reference to the novel's homosexual subtext. Despite the conservative and restrictive time period he was living in, Wilde made an effort to be authentic and not shy away from who he was. He continues to be referenced in pop culture, such as in movies like Clueless, which was released in 1995. He has become emblematic of the LGBTQ community and has paved the way in the literary community through his wit and talent. Perhaps this is why he continues to be discussed today. I also, before I end, I want to go back to The Picture of Dorian Gray, which has a lot of themes of morality and vanity, and as I stated earlier, it also deals with hedonism and pleasure. After Dorian Gray meets this wealthy man, he is convinced that there are more important things to life, for example, looking beautiful and indulging in one's pleasures. I think what Wilde has to say is really interesting, and I think the the theme of the story can still be discussed today and be related to. We can talk about it in a literary sense today. There's a lot of criticism of morality, the fact that despite the fact that Wilde said that art and morality are separate, which I think in a way he does try to portray this by um, the morality of the character Dorian. He separates it in terms of the artwork, but it also inadvertently becomes one and the same because as Dorian Gray uh, makes questionable decisions, decisions that we can maybe criticize in terms of morality, his picture starts to resemble these unethical or immoral decisions. In some points throughout the story, he directly or indirectly is responsible for other people's death. And there's something to be said about the way that he reacts to this fact that he is responsible for people's death. He doesn't show a lot of remorse throughout the story, and it really isn't until towards the end that he sort of has a what we can call a change of heart, which is similar to Dr. Faustus in Dr. Faustus, which towards the end of that story, Dr. Faustus realizes that he had signed away so many years of his life, and he regrets it towards the end once the day that he's supposed to be taken away comes. He regrets his decision and wants to go back on it, but it's too late. And in this story, Dorian somewhat seems to regret his decision as well, but in a lot of ways similar to Faustus's situation, it is too late. And I really think that's interesting, and it makes sense why the picture of Dorian Gray, apart from his comedies, is what he's widely known for, what Wilde is widely known for. And it's certainly the novel or the title of his work that I am most familiar with, having not known about and having not read it previously. It is the one that I remember hearing the most. I wasn't familiar or too familiar with his other work. So I can see why people really like this novel, and I can see why it was really popular back then, and it still is today. There are also a lot of subtext of homosexuality, and I think that's pretty widely known and evident. And again, it goes back to who Oscar Wilde was and how he also uh, incorporated some of his own experience into the novel. So I am really happy that I got to dive deeper into Oscar Wilde. I think his background is really interesting. The fact that he's from Ireland, that he lived in England, and then he lived in France for a time. I think he had a very interesting and maybe in some ways tragic life, and I believe it was very insightful to learn more and to research him. And I'm glad that I was able to share it with you all today. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Thank you.